Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Willis Show. Today I have with me Brad McLeay. Now, Brad is in an area where many people don't tread, which is sort of software, machine learning. And I am going to try and sum up what his company, 𝓲𝓵, and himself do. But before that, a little bit about Brad. Brad is the founder of CEO of 𝓲𝓵 and a project lead for the open source Kitops.ml project, a tool set designed to increase the speed and safety of building, testing, and managing AI machine learning models in production. This is Brad's second startup, his first Codenvy, the market's first container-based developer environment. Do not ask me what that means, but we'll get to that later. Was sold to Red Hat. I have heard of Red Hat because they were behind Linux, weren't they? The open source software company in 2017. In his 25-year career in the developer tools and DevOps software market, he's been the GM for Amazon's API gateway and built open and closed source products that have been leaders in Gartner Magic Quadrants. Again, I don't know what he's talking about, but that's fine. We're going to get more into this. In his free time, he enjoys cycling. Brad, you and I are on the same tribe. I love cycling, done the French Alps, reading, and vintage cars. So, Brad, welcome to the show, and we're going to get to the chase soon about what you really do, apart from dark, deep science and create myths about people and companies. Anyway, Brad, welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much for having me, Jeff. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Brad, I was going to sum up for everyone really here. So we are all in love with ChatGPT. Well, most of us are, right? It's amazing. It writes stories for you. It creates images for us. It writes blog posts for us. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But on top of that then is, and this is something I've experienced with AI, is that essentially a ChatGPT, the chatbots, essentially are scraping the intelligence of the planet and revealing it for everyone, and then they organize it for you. So it's pretty exciting times in that we feel like we're plugged into the brain of the planet and the intelligence and the creativity. So, Brad, you provide essentially a tool that helps make sure that the intellectual property and the special things that make companies different from other companies is protected in like a walled garden, so that you make sure that they can access and use AI, but not give it away for free. Because as we were discussing before, is that what's happening is that everyone can have access to ChatGPT's information, which means that your secrets could be revealed. So, Brad, welcome to the show. I hopefully explained it as best as possible. And tell us about what you really do after I made that story up.
Yeah, so you're largely there. The main thing that brought me to start this company is excitement about AI. It is an incredibly powerful technology. I do think it's going to change the way we interact with each other, the work we do, the businesses we build, the interactions we have with our customers. But it's not quite as simple. There's a more nuanced complexity to it than I think something like the internet or social media or mobile phones. Those were much more tools in the classical sense. They did a job. If you use them the same way every time, the result would be the same every time. Very deterministic. AI is different. AI is a little less deterministic. And in that way, it's a little bit more human. If I ask you the same question 10 times over 10 years, I'll probably get 10 slightly different answers.
You will.
Because you're human. If I ask a machine the same question over 10 years, and it's, not an AI, I will get exactly the same answer every time. That's a pretty fundamental change when you really think about it in how we use and interact with computers. Now, what we're trying to do is help companies that see this change and say, great, I want to benefit from AI, but I'm not comfortable taking all my sensitive data and all my secrets and all my competitive mojo and sending that up into an open AI out in the public realm and having it learn from me in a way that could benefit my competitors when they go and use OpenAI. Personally, that would make me very uncomfortable. It does make me very uncomfortable as a business owner. I wouldn't do that. And so if you kind of follow that logic forward, you find that there are a number an rapidly growing number of enterprises that are recognizing this and saying, we need to have our own, admittedly smaller, but still very powerful AI models inside our organization. We need to own them. We need to run them so that we know that they're learning from our business and they're not helping our competitors. We help those companies to get those AI models from kind of idea stage to in production, working with the business.
That is fascinating. And I think, the pace of AI, the rise of ChatGPT barely 18 months ago, that blew everyone away, frankly. 100 million users in 8 weeks signed up. Fastest growing native application ever. I've been in the computer industry since the mid-1980s when the PCs started making their presence felt commercially. Incredibly exciting times. But then we've had the web turn up in the mid-1990s, usable web, and the internet, which supports that. Then we have social media turning up in the early 2000s. I have never seen technology at this velocity before.
Nor have I. Nor have I. It is unprecedented. And I think that there's a bit of a lesson there, and maybe we shouldn't have been surprised, because what makes AI so compelling is that humanish aspect to it. I talk to it like I talk to you. I don't need to learn a programming language. There's no barrier like that. I don't need to learn a way to touch the screen on my phone and what apps to click to do what and how to slide this way and not that way, or any of those kind of user interface things. They're not there. I ask it a question, it gives me an answer. I tell it to do something, it tries to do it.
Yes.
And that really feels like that's a lot of why. I think it's also why you get so many people that are so disturbed or scared by AI, because there's almost nothing more scary than something that's deeply familiar but deeply unfamiliar at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is what AI is.
Yes. And I'm both. I'm not scared of it, but I certainly think we need to make sure that as companies, as individuals, we try and use it in a way that enhances us, doesn't take away from us. And I think, I think we're heading towards what I call a hybrid world where AI is your assistant. It isn't you.
That's right.
But sometimes people will go in and want to write an article and they give it all to ChatGPT. Write me an article. Don't do editing. Don't do stories. Don't make it interesting. And you can read it and going, this has been written by a chatbot, right? Because, and then I think, Yuval Harari, sorry, he said that he's really worried about the fact is that the AI has now got the ability to write stories, and stories are what makes us human, because it gets to the core of us. So what I'm intrigued by with what you're doing is it sounds complicated. So what's the process for you to provide this walled garden where you use AI within the company to actually amplify the company's intelligence, I suppose, make it more productive, increase the velocity of being able to do new things and test new things quickly? What's the process behind this? I'm curious about, where do you start with a company? Right. Do they ask you, are companies, basically tech managers, CTOs, are they the ones that are seeing the problem? Is it the marketing department? Quite often the CEO wouldn't even know what's going on, frankly, in this space, because they're running a business, not running a technology. So what big problem are you solving that they come to you with, and then what's the process? So it's 2 parts to this,
Yeah.
and then there's going to be subparts. So let's explore this.
Yeah. So great question. I think in a lot of organizations right now, they have software teams already, software engineering teams. They're building services, maybe they're building apps. And that's something that most organizations have been doing for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, depending on how kind of old they are. well established, and that, like you said, CTO would run that. Now comes AI. AI requires a radically different skill set, and it is much more in the scientific realm today. It looks more like experimentation because it is. And so you can't go to your software developers and say, okay, just build me an AI model, because they don't know how. There's decades of research involved in that, a huge amount of complexity. So they hire data scientists, ML engineers, folks who have spent their careers learning this highly specialized skill. Those folks typically, because they're so different in their makeup, in their background, in their experience, etc., they tend to get kind of shoved into a totally separate team. And so they're in a separate little enclave. They've got their own little tools, and they build a model. Now, the problem is the model they build, and I grew up, my parents are scientists, so I say this with love. Scientists are built to be experimenters. And for them, in a lot of cases, a job is kind of done when the experiment is proved out. But if you think about that, that's really a prototype. That's like, the rolling test bed that they use for cars. Like, it's not the thing you're going to sell on the showroom floor. It's kind of an engineering mock-up. Somebody, usually in the software team, has to take that model and then make a ton of changes to it to figure out how to make it run fast, reliably, safely for customers in a production environment. So there's a kind of collaboration there. The problem is that these two teams don't speak the same language. They don't use the same tools. The data scientists have never worked, in many cases, in businesses, dealt with production issues, had to understand all the compliance regulations that go into software at a production scale. And the software engineers who know all that stuff don't really understand models, don't understand how this AI stuff works. It is non-deterministic. It doesn't look like what they've always dealt with. So really, 𝓲𝓵 is there in order to help. We build tools to kind of help bridge that gap or create those connections so that when a model is created, it can be packaged, versioned, reproduced for people who are not AI experts. So they can just say, okay, now I can run this, which means now I can integrate it with my systems, which means now I can deploy it, which means now I can maintain it in production. So that's kind of what the process looks like. And the fundamental challenge that is slowing people down right now is that gap, that chasm that kind of exists between data scientists and really smart prototype models and production demands of 99% uptime and customers who are going to do wacky things with it that may not be expected. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you're basically trying to connect theoretical programmers with what we call business programmers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yep. So I've still got a big cloud. I'm seeing a big cloud, right? Can you provide an example of some projects you're doing or going to do that are quite practical in terms of, okay, so we want to use AI, we want to solve this problem. Do we want to make our CRM better? I don't know. Because CRM is actually a practical application of software. Okay.
Yeah.
Customer relationship management software, right? Database software, whatever. Is it like, because one part of it sounds to me like a big bang, fluffy cloud of everything that is going to produce this something. Can we be specific about sort of things that you work on?
Yeah. Let's take an example. So let's talk about a global retailer. They're one of the key pieces in their business is making sure that they're holding only as much inventory as they can turn over in, let's say, a quarter, a month, whatever the right period is. To do that, they've got to know that in different regions around the world, there are different preferences for certain products, for certain sizes, colors, styles, whatever. And so it's not like you send the entire catalog out to every region exactly the same way. Global retailers send a very tailored inventory all around the world in order to make sure that inventory management is as efficient as possible. So this global retailer had built an AI, and that AI was trained to understand the patterns of purchase throughout the year in all the different global locations and optimize what inventory was sent where. Fantastic. Huge benefit for a large company like that. Excellent. So it's created. The data science team, thumbs up. Awesome job, guys. That gets handed over to software. Software has to make some tweaks to it. And then they go and deploy it. Now, the data science team kind of loses sight of that once it kind of hits that software team. From their perspective, it's kind of done. And now they're moving on to a new problem because they've been asked to turn on to a new problem. But the software team doesn't really understand the model in depth. And so they deploy it out into production and it starts running. Now, after a year, it's made a great positive impact. Everybody's happy. But after 2 years, because models do something called drift, where their learning gets kind of skewed a little bit over time. And so after 2 years, in fact, it's not optimal. It slipped way back and is in fact fairly non-optimal in the way that it's telling people to distribute this inventory. Now, unfortunately, the software developers don't know what to do with that. They don't really have the tools to figure out what's going on or why, or should we pull it out of production, just not use it anymore? Is it that bad? Or do we need to tweak it? If we need to tweak it, how do we tweak it? We don't understand it. And the data scientists, like I said, they've kind of lost sight of this. This is in the rearview mirror. We solved that problem. We're on to the next one. So that is a bad outcome for that company because it started off good and then could get worse and worse and worse. What we do, what our tools do, help people to, we basically simplify the way that you would operationalize that model. So in production, you would better understand, hey, you've now crossed a threshold at which this model's performance is bad enough that you need a completely new model. Or maybe before that, this model's drifting in the wrong direction. It needs a little bit of retraining. It needs a little reminder or some updates to deal with maybe shifts in the way that regions are buying. We're going to help them see that. We're going to help bring the model back. We're going to make sure that the versioning is clear so people don't lose track of what's where and get them all reorganized so that it kind of, you might see goes great, starts to go down, but now we can help it go back up again instead of goes great and then kind of plummets.
Are we using AI at this stage, or are we just talking about a software project that basically?
No, this would be an AI project. Exactly. This is an AI model that makes these kind of constant smart decisions about, well, we need a little bit more, blue t-shirts in size L in Canada, for the next month. Yeah.
Right. And this was using AI before ChatGPT, obviously.
That's right. This is not a chatbot.
Right.
This is, I guess you would call more of a traditional kind of machine learning algorithm where it's taking in huge quantities of data in real time and adapting based on patterns that it's seen over a long history.
Right. So the thing we talked about too is about stopping that learning using machine learning, that not giving it out to the world. Is that part of what you're doing as well? Like it's not out in the cloud, it's actually just within the boundaries of the processors and the data center computers of the organization? Is because what we talked about before was you didn't want to be able to, basically we want to use AI, but not teach the rest of the world too much so we don't give away the jewels to the kingdom, the keys to the kingdom.
That's right. So that, and I'm glad you brought that up because I should have. But yes, this is a model that was owned and hosted and managed and operated within this global retailer. Because if they can create a hyper-efficient inventory supply chain, that's going to benefit them versus their competitors. They're going to be lower cost. They're going to be more capital efficient than their competitors. That's great for their shareholders. So absolutely, this was something that they knew they had the responsibility, sole responsibility for getting this right. Because they can't put it out there and say, hey, Google, you figure it out, or hey, OpenAI, you figure it out. Yep. Otherwise, it just helps everybody else.
Right. So we've moved, so AI, what we used to call AI in the past, like machine learning, has evolved. Can you tell us a little bit of difference between what is, I'm not a programmer, not a machine learning engineer. So what has the chatbots done for your industry that It's sort of machine learning sort of out in the wild a bit more now, isn't it, really? Instead of being in
Yeah.
in the dark caverns of machine learning, people that actually just you put them in a dark room and they come out with a solution about 3 years later. So has there been a difference? We did talk about this before a little bit in terms of what's the difference between the AI that was being used, machine learning, in other words, let machine learn about the patterns of stock that we have in different parts of the world. Has anything changed from that type of AI to today's type of AI? And I'm being very simplistic.
Yeah, no, and a lot has. And I think, some of it, as with most things, some of those changes are good and some of those changes are less good. I think that if you look more historically or at, kind of more, I hesitate to say it, but simplistic, slightly simpler or smaller scale machine learning models, one thing that was nice is that they, maybe because they were a little bit more constrained, they tended to be a little bit more predictable. They would solve a task and do that task very well, like inventory management. When you think of what's called a large language model, an LLM, something like OpenAI, ChatGPT, that's very different. That is meant to be quite generalized. It is generative AI. It's trying to create new, not, pattern match and predict, something that is more historically data driven. So I think there's a good and a bad to that. It's brought a lot of light to this area, a lot of attention, which is fantastic. I think it's important for people to learn about this area, and I think it's going to be a big part of our lives going forward. And so I think it behooves all of us to get more educated. So I think that's great. On the downside, I think that there's such a big focus on those large language models and the kind of chat style interaction that has resulted in a kind of unintended devaluing of some of these other types of AI, these other types of machine learning, these other types of models, which are incredibly valuable, but look a little bit more scientific or a little bit more mathematical than the chatbots.
Right. So really we have ChatGPT, which is, like you said, a generalized use of AI. In other words, it's basically can use a whole bunch of different things. But then we have what we call the vertical. So we can call ChatGPT the horizontal landscape of AI, as for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
Then when people say, well, I want to create an inventory system that allows me to predict, usage of summer in Milan, right? Okay. So this is more niche and vertical, isn't it? So we've got the evolution of the large language models, which is general, and then a lot of people going, wow, I can use this to develop vertical applications underneath this, which is fascinating. So now the other thing that I'm intrigued by also is, if you look at, I wrote an article recently which is about where's the money going in AI, and it was fascinating. We're looking at, basically, big data centers, processors, the hardware to actually do this, and the cost of it is staggering.
Yes.
Then on top of that, you've got software, which is the ChatGPTs and the vertical apps and so on. So, and then there's the data that feeds this, but what blew me away was the scale of investment going into, the FANGs, the Facebook, Metas, Amazons, Googles, Microsoft. One of the reasons that, ChatGPT teamed up with Microsoft, it just needed big data centers, lots of processors. And I did the numbers, and we're talking like $500 billion of data centers and processors to run these monsters globally. So the question out of that for me was watching this and going, in the past, we watched little scruffy startups essentially go and win the world. That's Twitter. That's Facebook, Meta. That was Google in the late 1990s. I'd be interested in your thoughts as a scientist engineer. Is it a lot harder for little guys and startups now to win in this big world of AI, ChatGPT? I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it is harder than it was with like the internet or the social media or the even the mobile booms, because it does require a massive amount of capital
Hmm.
to develop these huge large language models. However, I think one of the things that, at least the way I look at it, is something like an OpenAI. That is essentially a consumer platform. And
Correct.
you always have had consumer solutions and enterprise solutions or
Yes.
business solutions, and they've always looked different. And usually the consumer versions have always been larger than the enterprise because the audience is so much larger. And so I don't see a big difference there. I don't think it's very easy for a startup to come at this point and dethrone OpenAI in terms of, being the chat bot for everyday kind of consumer interactions. However, I don't think that I'm skeptical that anytime soon we will get a chat GPT that is so good that it can actually do all the tasks that are required and specialized the way they are inside of a business. Because even the same task in multiple businesses, as you know, is still quite specialized,
And
and
messy.
can be quite different and messy. That's right. All these things. And I think, I know you've seen it. I've seen it. I think everybody's seen it. You and these models are going to get better, but even for now, the best models, when you ask them to write even just normal prose, not legal documents, not, medical dissertations, not highly complex
Mhm.
compliance regulations, the results are okay. They're not a bad starting point, but you wouldn't want to just use them as is. Because like you said, you can see like the blogs written by ChatGPTs are not amazing. The stories written by ChatGPT are stories. They're not in danger of winning the Pulitzer Prize. So I think the reality is that at a consumer level, our tolerance for quality is high-ish. At an enterprise level, when somebody's paying you a lot of money for something, their expectation of quality is extremely high.
Mm.
And I don't think we're quite there yet. Will
Yeah.
it get there? I mean, probably at some point, but I don't think that's going to be a tomorrow thing.
Yeah. Yeah. In looking at it, because I've been in tech since the mid 1980s, which is a little bit scary, but it's 40 years. And as I mentioned before, the intro was, the evolution of technology and humans' use of it. And um, I think just watching this is that companies still come to grips with using generalized ChatGPT type models and platforms, but how can I make it specific? How can I develop something within an organization? Let's say, for example, I want to develop a training course, right? Or, how do I do that? And it comes down to cobbling together a bunch of different AI tools, some or out of the box. If you don't want to be writing it from scratch, you can use ChatGPT for creating an overview, but then how do I turn that into a presentation? How do I record it? Do I and create an avatar with my voice that can actually present it without me doing recording, because we can do that now. So maybe the startups are going to specialize more in the vertical places to play, such as specific applications. Would you think that would be correct?
Absolutely. Like I think that when people talk about AI agents, that's really what they're talking about. And I think increasingly when you look at what the big companies are doing with AI, that's how they're developing some of these solutions, which are very impressive, is there'll be a highly specialized AI agent that only does task A. Let's take LinkedIn for an example. It's only going to be able to kind of scan and process all the different jobs that are posted on AI, than on LinkedIn. Another one is going to be specialized in looking at your LinkedIn profile and understanding what your skills are ideally suited to. Now, to find out which jobs you're ideally suited to requires this agent to do its specialized job and then talk to that agent about
Yes.
its specialized job and make that connection. And you can kind of keep chaining these all the way along. So yeah, I absolutely see a world in which a startup can innovate and excel at being one or multiple of those agents
Mm.
or within an organization. And I can imagine enterprises kind of picking and choosing, saying, ooh, that agent is perfect for us, and that one is good, but I think we can find better. Let's go look at this startup. Maybe they've got a better agent for doing that particular job in our industry, in our vertical, for our, region, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because the pace has been so fast, is that I think even, I don't know how you feel. I've been in tech for a long time. We live and breathe it. We write about it, especially for more marketing and communication and content. But I feel overwhelmed, and I don't know how you feel sometimes. Do you feel overwhelmed with the pace of it?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. It is very hard to keep up. I think you just, to be honest, even I'm kind of like at the point where I'm like, okay, there are just going to be some areas of this that I'm not going to be able to keep up with. Like, it's just not possible. And so you got to kind
That'd
of,
be about 99% for me, frankly. But you might get to 10%. I'm going to be about 1%, understanding. So I'll just make stories up then, and that comes down to don't ruin don't don't ruin a good story with the facts, right? So it's really about that. So yeah, that's interesting to know. And I thought that may have been the case, that you may be overwhelmed by parts of it. You're going, stop, I just need to get off the bus for a
yeah,
little bit
yeah. I
and
think to
watch.
some extent, as the hype dies down, I think because right now, this is all so new that everybody's talking about every little thing as the biggest thing. But at some point, it'll stop being quite so new, and we'll have a more reasonable threshold of what constitutes newsworthy, right? We
Yeah,
don't talk about every little thing that happens in the automotive industry on front page news because we get cars. We get it. It's cars. And so you don't need to talk about every little thing, and it's easier to keep up. And just right now, that bar is not quite where it should be. It's quite low. And so anything that clears even just a little bit of the bar is front page news. That's going to start rising, and we'll get some separation of wheat and chaff pretty soon, I think.
okay, cool. I'm going to get back to cycling, reading, and vintage cars, because you're actually I'm not into vintage cars, I'm into cars. I love reading. In fact, half my day spent reading. As Charlie Munger said back, Warren Buffett was, all Warren Buffett does is sit in his arse all day reading. Okay.
Not a bad life.
But I still feel guilty that I actually spend that amount of time. But the reality is, we now live in an information knowledge world, and you're going to be run over unless you're doing a lot of reading. That's my sense anyway. So, but we'll get back, and we'll get to cycling in a minute. But I have one other area in the AI space, which is not on topic for you necessarily, but you live and breathe this AI machine learning space. We're watching ChatGPT has caught Google with its pants down, even though it invented a lot of the actual AI technology. It bought DeepMind, Mustafa Suleyman, for 800 million back in 2016. We now are watching, Elon Musk throw his toys out of the cot constantly, which is Elon Musk. He's going, I hate you guys because you haven't done the right thing with ChatGPT. We're going to give it to the world, and it's going to be really bad and dystopian. And guess what? Next week he launches and raises $8 billion for his own chat bot, right? So-called Grok. And then we've got, Amazon creating it. We've got Microsoft creating, and so we've got this basically fight for world domination for generalized chatbots. How do you think that's going to play out? Who's going to win here? I'd be interested in your take on this.
Oh, that is that's an
I
impossible question. That is an impossible question. I mean, certainly at the moment, there's only a handful of companies that you can kind of see having a reasonable chance, I think.
yeah.
I am not a Musk fan, so I'll be honest, I probably overly dismissive of that one. Um,
I used to be a
that's
Musk
why,
fan, but I'm getting more dismayed as absolute
yeah,
power seems to corrupt absolutely, frankly. So yeah.
I think he's a very good example of that. Yes, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think what's almost more interesting to me, Jeff, is because that fight will happen, and I think we kind of already know the players. What's more interesting to me is there is a whole raft of open source models
Yes.
um, that are being created. Those I think are fascinating, partly because I've got a strong open source leaning in background. Sure, that's my bias,
So this is
but
like the
also
red.
because
This is like the red hat was to programming.
exactly
That's
was to
yeah.
operating systems. That's right. Linux kind of overthrew Windows, and its open sourceness was a big part of that. My hope is that some of these open source models, which are also growing in capability as rapidly as anything else, that they will actually be a genuine player in this market as we move forward. That's my big hope, because I think you need transparency in these things. And transparency is not something that OpenAI or anybody, frankly, right now, other than some of those open source models, is really bringing to the table. And that transparency, I think, will be increasingly as important as the power of these models grows. The more powerful something is, the more I think we should all want to be able to look under the hood, look inside the brain and see what's going on.
Yeah. The other thing I came across the other day, which I think is really interesting, is the challenge with a global chatbot, ChatGPT type model, is that he homogenizes humanity because it, and also the people that are creating it are a lot of them, at the moment, America is the epicenter of AI. And on top of that, then you've got an authoritarian state, which is China, which has also got the
Mhm.
scale and data to make sense of it with its face recognition, data security, and it's got so much data. And that's the more data you got, the smarter it gets, also, isn't it? So, but it's really fascinating to watch what's happening. Um, and some of the likes in the video, which are encouraging it as well, is what we call sovereign AI, where countries maybe need to say, we are going to develop our own AI chatbot, maybe
Yep.
built on open AI,
Yep.
so we don't lose our identity rather than being homogenized into American, um, basically large language models that homogenize everything. I thought it was quite fascinating actually looking at that in that, and some countries are starting to lean into that.
Yeah, I find that fascinating as well. And I think it is interesting when you think about an AI as being like a person. Um, there's a logic to that. There's a logic to that. I mean, and I think you said it at the beginning, Jeff. What is different about these AIs is that they are categorizing and curating the information in a way that search didn't. Search didn't originally curate anything.
It just
It
made it just made it visible.
That's right. It made it visible, and more importantly, it made it visible based on the number of backlinks. So the degree to which the general world population felt like that thing was valuable would raise its kind of stature within the search. It's different when you're talking about something that can curate now, because now that gets biases built in. And that's something that should worry us. Not that biases are bad, we all have biases, but the idea that they are, again, if they're not transparent, if you can't examine them, if you can't say to yourself, oh, well, I know this AI's bias is A, B, C, then that gets worrying. A hidden bias is scary. An open bias is just something you need to be aware of.
Yeah. The other thing that fascinates me too is that let's take two countries, China, America. One's an authoritarian state. But I think essentially it is well-meaning. It's almost like Singapore is a benevolent dictatorship. That's how it grew.
Mhm.
In fact, if you look at Singapore, it's amazing. Right. That was driven by a benevolent dictatorship, which is quite authoritarian. We got America, which is messy, and it's all about independence and giving everyone a voice. In other words, we have the rise of independence. Whereas in China, the philosophy is different. So this is where training models and bias becomes really fascinating, in that China believes that its philosophy, which is, millennia, is that the state should come first. It's almost like the God, whereas America says the individual comes first. That is a bias.
Exactly. Now, at that global level, that's a transparent bias. And so that doesn't scare me as much, because you can say, well, I know this about the kind of Chinese approach to AI, and I know this about the American approach to AI. It's a little bit more worrying when it's two things from America and you just don't know, or anywhere, it doesn't have to be America, but from any location where you don't know what kind of biases may have gotten in there. And so in some of the open source models, they're releasing what are called the weights along with the model, which tells you a little bit about how those kind of biases, if you will, have been built in. And that's, I think, really the direction that I would like to see more and more people go. And my hope is that as enterprises, as governments start to look at ways to build their own AIs, that they look towards those as the examples, or the foundation, let's call it, of what they build, more than the foundation of those other options, which are very closed off, which are very black box. Trust us, it's really good. Versus, here, check it out if you think it's good. So.
Yeah, I totally agree, because you only have to look at what was the tagline for Google when they started. The tagline was "Do no evil."
Yep.
That has since been removed. I'm not sure what it really is today, but with so much power comes great responsibility. The ancient philosopher said, I think it might have been Donald Duck or something, I can't remember, but the reality watching Google, and I've been watching them because we have very SEO optimized content, and we've played Google's game, and you just have to. There's no other way. This is the oracle, the god of search, right? So if you want to be visible, then you've got to play their game. Trouble is, though, that they're slowly taking the content themselves without links, such as the new, AI reviews, and basically saying this is our content. Well, everyone knows it isn't, but then we all start to become invisible because we're no longer discovered and visible. We are slowly, and we're getting, what's interesting for me, I'm a little bit of a tangent here, but it does have implications for AI, is that the data that feeds the beasts, and data feeds the beasts of Google, data feeds the beasts of AI, ChatGPT, and chatbots. The reality is that where the bigger players like News, I think Reddit and so on, have struck deals with OpenAI, 250 million here, I think, with News, 60 million for Reddit or something. And that's fine. Except it's not, in that there are 100 million bloggers out there that actually are creating content. And what's their negotiating power? It's so close to zero. Maybe we need to have a unionized blogging organization globally with a class action.
I mean, I think the world is going to change a lot. You never know. Absolutely. The world is in the midst of a huge change. I think that one thing that is not changed, in my opinion, though, is that ultimately quality always, maybe not always, quality usually wins. When it comes to things like this, when it comes to knowledge work, usually quality wins.
Yeah.
And so I think the ones most at risk are the ones who benefited from, despite lower quality content, benefited from exceptional SEO tweaking,
Yes.
or massaging.
Yep.
I'm not super sad if that becomes less tenable, I would, as long as the replacement is higher quality content. But again, that comes back to how good a job does AI do in curating this massive amount of content? Because
Yeah.
it's not currently good at creating exceptional content.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And this is where I think the human meets the machine and comes together and creates something quite fantastic. Yeah.
that's right.
So let's go back to what you do, because we talked about the fact that you're trying to create, keep IP within an organization when you go in and do a project which uses AI, machine learning. How do you do that? In other words, are you basically using the IP and they're just using it to create vertical applications that really work well with AI? Is that what it does? So how do you create this walled garden?
Yeah, so it really just
Yeah.
depends on what the customer is trying to accomplish. Typically, these customers will have their own computing environments already for their software assets. They'll have created services, they'll have created apps that are digital. So
Mhm.
they've got that infrastructure there, but that infrastructure is not optimized for AI. You can think of it as, to create an overly simplistic kind of analogy. Imagine you have a canning assembly line. It works really good for canning.
Mhm.
But now you want to get into making cars. Yes, you've got an assembly line, and yes, a car is made by an assembly line, but that is not the same assembly line. Like, you're going to need to make a lot of changes for that assembly line to build a car, or to get an assembly line building a car when you've got expertise building or doing canning. So it's a little bit like that. These are companies that have that canning assembly line. Now they're looking at the AI and they need help to understand, what do we need to change? What can we reuse? How much of our knowledge and processes will just work? And where are we going to need to make those changes? So our tool kind of helps people to kind of update that assembly line to work with AI. And then we also work with them in some cases to give some amount of guidance on kind of what they can do from a process perspective as well.
Right, cool. That's great. So AI is going to challenge, it's going to actually it's going to not blow up, but it's going to impact almost every corner of business and every corner of humanity, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about, you're old enough, I'm old enough to remember a time before the internet, and it was a
Yes.
radically different time. And there really isn't any part of our lives today that has not been changed by this ubiquitous access to information, ubiquitous access to each other. I think mostly for the better. There are dark corners to everything humans make, but mostly for the better. And I see AI being the same thing. It is going to be another monumental shift. And it's interesting to me that my kids, who are teenagers now, they will inevitably be saying to their kids, well, I remember a time when there was no AI. And that's going to blow their kids' minds. What do you mean no AI? Like, how did you get anything done? And so it's going to be that kind of massive tectonic shift. It's not going to all happen overnight, and it's not all going to be perfect. But I think we're going to figure it out. I'm an optimist in that perspective.
Yeah, it's I'm both in it and trying to stand back from it all at the same time. And humans, we struggle with change. So, but the pace of change here, I think, is actually our biggest challenge. And we've got a lot of information, but we need a lot more wisdom, because information and data is not wisdom.
It's true. And I think one thing that has always served me well in my career is, and it's hard to do because it goes against human nature, but whenever I'm presented with a hard problem or an uncertain outcome, my instinct has always been, of course, to run away or to wait until everything becomes clear and then decide something.
Mm.
But I've always forced myself to instead say, no, when things are unclear, when things are uncertain, the best way to get to the correct outcome is to start working through it now. Start early and iterate fast. And you start early, you iterate fast, and you get to the good outcome before everybody else, before the people who are sitting back and waiting and going, ooh, that looks messy. I'm going to wait till it cleans up a little bit. Then I'm going to jump in.
No, yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that's happening right now is you have companies and leaders who are looking at this happening, and it is very tempting and it's hard. I mean, it's going to be different for every company. But I think some of them are going to look at that and say, you know what? We're going to jump in. We're going to make some mistakes. It's not going to be perfect, but the things we learn along the way and how far we get will ultimately be a massive competitive advantage in 5 years, 10 years. And that's what we're playing for.
Yeah.
That's how I look at the world. And I think those folks are the ones that are going to be the next set of real winners when this world changes, because it will change.
Yeah. So in other words, just instead of sitting back and watching it going, I'll wait until it becomes clearer, you need to go from ideation to creation and then lean in.
You need to lean in. You need to start doing the work.
Yeah.
And that's where hopefully we can help.
Great. So just to wrap it up here on that level, and then we're going to have a little back channel chat quickly about cycling if you've got time, and vintage cars and reading. Anyway, we'll go there in a minute offline. But in terms of what do you target customers? No, it sounds to me like it's more enterprise level. And do you specialize in certain verticals, or do you just provide the tools to do any vertical?
Yeah, they're not very vertical specific. I think more the specificity is that it's kind of tends to be mid to large enterprises. It's companies where they have an established software environment. They have teams that are working on, deploying production software, managing production software, building production software, testing production software. They have all those things in place, and they're struggling with how do we get AI connected into those systems? How do we build it into our digital DNA in a way?
So how you can take the new and help the old.
That's right. Exactly. And so the folks that we tend to find kind of get what we're doing most are folks in that kind of CTO org, folks, with more of a production responsibility. They're the ones I think that correctly look at AI and correctly understand, ooh, this could be really scary once it hits production unless we've got our stuff figured out.
Okay.
We don't have it figured out. This could get very ugly very fast.
Yep.
The data science side, like I said, I think they understand what we're doing and I think they appreciate it, but it's not the core of what they're focused on. They're focused on building the model, developing the model.
Yep. Thanks, Brad. It's been an absolutely fascinating chat. I was going to be on another call with someone else. They didn't show up. And this is like an accidental podcast interview that we were going to do in about 2 weeks. And you were going to be somewhere, I was going to be somewhere else, and it was actually going to get ugly. But we met accidentally and hit record. So it's actually fantastic. So thank you very much. And how can people find you at 𝓲𝓵? You've got your... So I'm hearing 𝓲𝓵 and I'm seeing Kitops.ml. So
yeah, so I don't want to overcomplicate things. The easiest thing is just to go to 𝓲𝓵.com. Kitops is our open source project.
Okay.
So for those who are more technical, they can look for that on GitHub. Otherwise, 𝓲𝓵.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Brad Mickley on LinkedIn to my knowledge, so I shouldn't be too hard to find.
Right, that's cool. So, just a little side on that. It's actually good having a different name. I've got a different name. So I got 𝓵𝓵𝓪𝓻𝓷 back in the day. So being called, different, not very nice names in the schoolyard has actually worked out best in the long run.
It's true. We lose back then, we win later in life. That's right.
Thanks, Brad, and look forward to catching up in real life one day in Canada or somewhere in the world, or even in South Africa. You never know. So maybe like gaming, big reserve, big hunt. No, we won't do hunting. That's not allowed. That's good. But thank you, Brad. It's been an absolute pleasure, buddy. What do they use in Canada? We use mate in Australia. Americans use buddy. What do you guys use, or just Jeff, Brad?
Probably Jeff, Brad. I don't know. We use everything. We're not very picky, but it has been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on, Jeff. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Brad.